And I could smell the smell of alcohol just floating through the air. And I looked into his bloodshot eyes, and he squinted at me, and he barked, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir, I do, Senator. But I am sorry you are not allowed into this dinner." My 25-year-old insides were trembling. But an order is an order, and I was told no one gets into the dinner without their invitation. And he did not have his invitation. I was just a young woman who had grabbed an unexpected opportunity to make history and to make a difference. When I stood up and was sworn in with 4 other women, who became the first 5 women in the Secret Service to be sworn in as agents in 106-year history, and yes, Pastor Mike, it was a boys' club. I never, ever dreamed, however, or could I ever foresee that I would be saying no to this man. I don't think many people said no to him. But I was not raised with a silver spoon in my mouth, as he may have been. Actually, I was raised in Perry, Ohio, population 900. Are you from Perry? Okay, Ohio. So I was raised in Perry, Ohio, went to Ohio University. Okay, thank you. But not being raised with a silver spoon in my mouth, my parents built a little, probably 1,400 square foot cement block house. And in the kitchen was the cement laundry tub, and that's where I got my baths. Now in 1950s and 60s, we women did not have, we girls did not have a lot of role models. Anybody remember a role model they might have had? This was mine. Okay? And I thought I looked just like her. Except I didn't have brown hair, so. After I graduated from Ohio University, I packed up a U-Haul and made my way to Washington, D.C. from Ohio to seek my fame and my fortune. And I was fortunate enough to have a job at University of Maryland in the Adult Education Division, but I didn't stay there very long. And ultimately, I quit, and I bounced around at a couple other jobs, and then I met a woman who was to become my roommate. She worked for the Washington, D.C. Police Department, and she was in the sex squad. And so I thought that would be a really juicy job to have. So I applied, and I went to rookie school. There were 4 women among all the guys that were in the Washington, D.C. Police Department. Guess what? We all went to the youth division because women and kids are supposed to go together. And at that time, if you were a female Metropolitan Police woman, you had to have a college degree. The men did not. Somebody finally sued and won that suit and opened it up to women who did not have college degrees, and that was also the time that they finally went into uniform and were on the streets, so to speak. After probably, I would say, a year and a half, I was getting really tired of being in the youth division. And I ran into a fellow that had been in rookie school with me, and he said, "Why don't you come over and be a White House police officer?" And I said, "You know they don't have any women." And he said, No, they're trying to get some positions approved. Here's the captain's number, here's his name, call him, and you'll be first in line. So I finally did, and I was invited in for an interview. And I remember walking down a hallway in the White House, and coming up to some big mahogany doors, and they opened, and there were 4 or 6 men sitting around a conference table, and that's all I remember. But I must have given the right answers, because after a lot of paperwork and 6 months later, I had my top secret clearance. So I finally became an executive protective service officer. And that's what they call today White House Police. It was the uniformed division of the Secret Service. Now you have to remember, there had never been female agents, so they weren't about to just hire us. They had to check us out for a year to make sure we could do the job. So what they did do was the Secret Service would pull us out from the dregs of the executive office building doing bookwork or paperwork or whatever women are supposed to do, and they would use us to help protect the wives of foreign dignitaries. We had no training. I mean, 5 out of 7 that they originally hired came from the police department, so we knew how to shoot a firearm, but we didn't get Secret Service training until a lot further down the line. We had on-the-job training. And my first assignment was I flew to Hawaii to protect Lon Nol of Cambodia and his wife. Now, his wife didn't speak English, and I sure as heck did not speak Cambodian, but we both spoke a few words of French, and we smiled a lot. Now, Lon Nol had been very friendly to the United States. He probably let us land aircraft and supplies in Cambodia when we weren't supposed to be there. And he had had a stroke, and so they flew him to Hickam Air Force Base for medical treatment. And that was in the days when the carotid artery surgery was brand new, and they decided not to do it on him. We were there for about 3 weeks. Like I said, they had flown in doctors from Walter Reed Hospital in DC, and they finally decided that he was good enough to go home. He wasn't going to get any better. So we did take a helicopter trip and flew up around Diamond Head in Hawaii and back, mainly so he could practice getting in and out of a helicopter, because when he went back to Cambodia, that was going to be how he traveled. At the end of his stay, just before he was going to leave, they decided to give a farewell dinner. Now, he could not attend. The gentleman that's to my left was his general. The woman to his left, or the lady of that night, I don't know who she was. I just want to make it clear we did not procure her. Okay. I get back to Washington, D.C. I'm working in the D.C. field office. I'm doing check forgery investigations, background investigations, and then all of a sudden, I get a phone call, and I have another protective assignment. And this time, I was an undercover camp counselor to Caroline Grimaldi. She was 14 years old. She was the daughter of Prince Rainier and Grace Kelly, and she was going to camp at Camp Onika in the Pocono Mountains. And this is a very old, well-established camp where wealthy mainline people from Philadelphia sent their kids for generations. I don't know why they wanted me in there undercover. The only people who knew who I was the camp nurse and the 2 women who owned the camp. And then I found out later, much later, that they did allow 2 of the counselors to know who I was so they could smooth that transition, because I had never been there before. And I was getting to do a lot of things that only counselors who had been there for years would normally do. So somebody said to me, I've never heard of an undercover camp counselor. And actually, as I thought about it, I haven't either. They told me I had to teach something, and they said, what can you do? And I didn't think they meant shoot a gun. So I said, well, I can swim. And for all of you teachers out there, I learned that knowing how to do something and knowing how to teach it are 2 entirely different things. So they gave me a Red Cross soft book that I could read under the covers at night with my flashlight so I could be one step ahead of the girls that I was teaching. The next person that I was sent off to protect was Yekaterina Furtseva. She was the Russian Minister of Culture. She was the highest ranking woman in Russia at that time. She was also rumored to be Khrushchev's girlfriend. I can neither confirm nor deny that. I don't know. But we saw a lot of museums from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles to San Francisco. And we get to San Francisco, and somebody invites her to a cocktail party in their apartment, condominium. And because I was a female, I got to attend it inside instead of standing a doorpost on the outside. So I get in a corner where I can see everybody and keep my eye on everybody. And I feel a presence of somebody coming up beside me, and this female voice says, "Is that Mrs. Furtseva over there?" And I turned around to look at my childhood idol. I grew up watching her movies. Anybody else out there ever see a movie by? Yeah, okay. We talked for about 15 minutes. She was at that time an ambassador at the UN. And we talked about how heavy our purses were because, oh, I forgot to tell you, I always carried my gun in my purse because nobody ever thought to get us holsters. And she was always carrying a big bag of papers, and she actually broke some veins in her arm. What I didn't know at the time was that she always wanted to be in law enforcement, either with the CIA or the FBI or the Secret Service. But in her day, when she was younger, there were no such positions. So gosh darn, she had to be a movie star. The director of the Secret Service, and I'll read this to you because I'm not sure you can all see it. Miss Laura Lowe wrote a letter in 1963 to the chief. They called him the chief then, not the director. And she wanted to be apparently an agent, and she was inquiring about that. And he wrote back, "It's not possible for women to be Secret Service agents. Women are employed in the Secret Service in the capacity of secretaries," they got to type, "stenographers, typists, and clerks." So unfortunately, Chief Raleigh never could imagine what would happen just a few years later when they swore 5 of us in 1971. Now we had our backs to the camera. You might wonder why, because they were going to use us undercover, and they didn't want our faces flashed all over AP and wire services and UPI, and so we had to keep our faces away from the camera. There was an agent who talked then, and before we actually did the swearing-in ceremony, and he said, "This day will go down in infamy, just like the sinking of the Titanic or the San Francisco earthquake." We didn't know whether to laugh. Everybody else was laughing, but it was kind of embarrassing at the time. Here was another picture of the first 5 with Director Raleigh, who had said just a few years earlier that there would not be female Secret Service agents. This was the name of my book, and when I wrote it, it's a memoir about my history and my past, and the fact that we were 5 women among 1,150 men. Now, you would have thought that was great, and it would have been if they had all wanted us there. But quite frankly, a lot of them did not think that women had any business being agents. And fortunately for us, we did have some mentors, some supervisors, including Clint Hill, who was Jackie Kennedy's agent, who could see the need for female agents. So there's the 5 women. I run into them now. I go to associations of former Secret Service agents, functions like Christmas dinners in Tampa, people come up to me, I don't remember them, and they remember me because there were so few of us. After we finally became agents, then we got some training. So the first thing we do is we go to Treasury School, and we're mixed with other agents from other agencies. And it's, I think 8 weeks of schooling, mostly about law and how you take somebody down. So there was some physical stuff, but not judo, as some people think. And there were 2 of us. I put an arrow next to me. The other gal is retired. She's the only one who retired from the Secret Service, Lori Anderson, and she lives down in, I think it's Winter Park. And she broke a lot of barriers as she continued to be an agent for 20 years. Then we got to go to Secret Service school, and we learned how to detect counterfeit money. Because if you didn't know it, that's why the Secret Service was created. It was in 1865, and Abraham Lincoln, on the afternoon of the day he was assassinated, signed all the paperwork to begin the organization of the Secret Service, because it was after the Civil War, and 50% of the money that was in circulation then was counterfeit. So you may know the Secret Service as the guys behind the sunglasses protecting the president and so forth, but they originally and still investigate counterfeiters and check forgers if the checks are presented by the U.S. or backed by the U.S. government. There were 2 of us in this class. The other gal is Kathy Childers, and she's in the process of writing a book, and hopefully we'll get it published this year. So with that training, I learned how to shoot my gun. I mean, I already knew how to shoot that gun, but I also got to learn how to take apart and put together and shoot an Israeli Uzi submachine gun. And then we were trained on 12-gauge shotgun with slugs, which hurt a lot. And even some of the male agents winced at it. When I was out in LA, ultimately, this is at the LA range, and here I'm shooting. Then I got to go to technical operations briefing school. I didn't think I needed an arrow in this picture. I didn't know. I mean, I knew it was picture day. I just put on my favorite outfit. I mean, who could foresee 46 years later that I'd be standing in front of all of you? But we learned how to operate cameras, how to do surveillance, how to duck other people's surveillance, so it was pretty useful. After all that schooling, and I'm a full-fledged agent now, then they finally pulled me back out of the DC office and put me to protect Tito and his wife from Yugoslavia. And that's when I learned that a friendly crowd can be as dangerous as an angry crowd. They were well-liked. We traveled across country to LA, and the crowds were enormous. So you get on the rope lines and you grab each other's hand, the agent beside you, and you try to keep the crowd from smothering your protectee. After that, I'm back in the Washington, D.C. field office. Now, you may remember, I really wanted to do counterfeit investigation or check forgery. So I got to do some undercover work. And I finally got my brown hair like Wonder Woman. Ultimately, after doing some undercover work in D.C., 1972 came around, and that was a presidential election year. And so then I was assigned to protect Shirley Chisholm, and she was the first African-American woman to run for president on a major party ticket. She was a Democrat. She was the first black woman to be a congresswoman. And I spent the summer going back and forth between Arlington or Washington, D.C., and Brooklyn Heights, New York. In the fall, or towards the end of the summer, was the Miami convention, when they were going to nominate who was going to run. So they nominated George McGovern, and he picked Thomas Eagleton as his running mate. Does anybody remember Thomas Eagleton and what happened to him? Yes, the press found out that he had had some electroshock treatments, and they decided that that was not a good thing for a president to have had, to be one heartbeat away from the presidency. So he stepped down. I had been protecting his wife for a few days before all of that hit the fan, and I got reassigned a few weeks later to Mrs. McGovern. So I spent the rest of the summer with Mrs. McGovern on the National Campaign Trail. And I can tell you, it is absolutely exhausting to be on the campaign trail. And I can't even imagine what agents are dealing with today, because I didn't have to deal with terrorists. I was looking out for mentally ill people who wanted to harm whoever I was protecting. This picture is probably one of the scariest moments in my life, and you can't tell it, but it was in a high school in New Jersey. It was hot. George McGovern was late. Mrs. McGovern, they threw her to the wolves to placate the crowd, and finally George shows up. He does his speech, and then at the end of it, all these people rush the stage to shake their hands. What's wrong with this picture? I'm behind her. If somebody had had a gun in their hand as they reached up to shake a hand like Bremer did with George Wallace, I could never have taken the bullet for it. Now, I had my hand in my purse on my gun, but I was so scared and nervous, and the adrenaline was just running high. I was just really happy when they finished shaking hands and we could get them out the back door. So, unfortunately, your adrenaline runs very high a lot of the time as an agent. That's why they get to retire after 20 years. One thing that George liked to do was impromptu get out, stop the limousine, stop the motorcade, and jump out and shake hands, as any politician likes to do. Unfortunately, this was unscheduled, and it was on Fifth Avenue during rush hour in New York City. And what I am doing is giving a big elbow to that newsman that got between me and Mrs. McGovern. We don't have a love affair with the media anyway, so I put a lot into that elbow. As I went around the country protecting Mrs. McGovern, here's a stop that she made at a nursing home, and we're coming out of it. And you can see the difference in height. I mean, Eleanor McGovern was probably this high. She was little, and she needed protecting just from the crowds. As you all know, George McGovern lost by a lot. I think he carried one state, New Hampshire, if I'm not wrong, and the District of Columbia. We're flying back to DC, and somebody decides to take this picture. Now, why we look at all awake, I have no idea, because everybody was exhausted. The candidates are exhausted, the agents are exhausted, the press is exhausted, but it was the one time that we could smile and get this picture, which I really, really treasure. After that, it was like, okay, I have had protection up to here. Get me out of DC. So I requested a transfer to Los Angeles when I found out that there was an opening. And I pleaded to go. They said, well, they've never let a girl out of Washington, D.C. And I said, I understand that, but I just want to be considered like anybody else. And so, since I was talking to the special agent in charge of the Washington office, who happened to be the first African-American male that the Secret Service ever hired, he kind of understood a little bit about discrimination. So within 2 days, I had the orders cut on my desk to go to Los Angeles, which actually was reverse discrimination because I never got to fill out the paperwork like anybody else. So here I am in Los Angeles, smoggy Los Angeles, and I did some more undercover work. Now, the epitome to me of being an agent was to work undercover in counterfeiting, if you remember. So here I am sitting on a curb with my informant, and we're waiting for the bad guy to come so he can introduce me to the bad guy, and then we can extract him from the equation. And I brought in another male agent as my boyfriend, and we ultimately did effect an arrest. The bad guy had done a lot of counterfeiting of money. He also took Mexican centavos and squished them to enlarge them to the size of a quarter. And of course, they were really cheap, so he made a lot of money selling those quarters. Okay, the next picture I want to apologize for. I mean, I have to be politically correct. So if this guy is in any one of your families, I'm really sorry. But this was the picture I was handed as I boarded a plane for Chicago, Palatine actually, to protect a young witness. She was 14 years old, and she had been in with the mafia. She was a prostitute. She was one of our witnesses against one of their counterfeit operations. The mafia sent her to Sicily to get her out of the country. Being young and dumb, somehow she found her way back to Chicago. So they snatched her up. And then we had to re-snatch her up and put her like in a witness protection program, just like on TV. So we had her in a motel, and myself and 2 other female agents had to babysit her for like 3 weeks. And we only got out of that hotel room, I think, twice. It was not fun, but it's one of the things that you have to do. And fortunately, I never ran into this guy. So I then decided I wanted out of the Secret Service because it's not a career and it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. And they own you 24/7, kind of like the military. I put in my paperwork, I gave them a month's notice, and then they sent me to Washington, D.C. to sit under a tree and guard a house. It was so much fun. I was guarding the house of the Secretary of Treasury, Bill Simon. He was the energy czar, and he was going back and forth to the Middle East to try and broker with the oil sheiks to get the oil prices down. And he decided to make one of those trips, and because I had been there, I had gotten to know his wife, Carol, and she decided to go with him. Now, normally, she would not get protection, but because I was there, they assigned me to guard her in the Middle East. I was the only agent to guard her in the Middle East. Bill Simon had a whole contingent of agents, but if she was with him, then I could have a break, but otherwise I was with her all the time. We went to 9 countries, 13 cities in 13 days. And I think it's listed up there. France, we went to Egypt, to Cairo, Egypt. I got to go up inside of a pyramid. I got to ride on a camel. Then we went to Israel, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Bethlehem, and then Kuwait, where when we got off the plane, it was 130 degrees. And if you want to know what that's like, put your oven up to 130 degrees, open the door, stick your head in it, and try and take a breath. And I don't care that it's dry air. It doesn't, no. Then we went to Italy for lunch, to the Pope's summer palace. And then that night, we flew to Hamburg, Germany, for the night. And then the next day, we were in England. And then we did a little bit of R&R in the Bahamas for like 1 day or 1.5 days before we went home. So this is me on the camel after after the pyramid, and I can tell you, they stink badly. And I got back to my hotel room, and I had another function to go to with her, and I couldn't change my clothes. We went to Oil Sheikh Yamani's summer home, and he was going to do a dinner for us. So here, all day long, these men in this pit were roasting lambs. And I have no idea how hot it was down there because it was 90 where I was standing looking down into the fire pit. That night, they had dancing men. No women in belly dancing. And then for dinner, the lambs were carved up and we ate in a big tent with Persian carpets the length of, well, at least from here to the doors back there. Unfortunately, I had gotten the Middle East trot in Egypt, I think, from probably eating ice cream that wasn't well refrigerated. So besides not drinking the water in countries that don't have good sanitation and don't eat the ice cube, don't eat frozen milk products. In 2012, I went to Santa Barbara to attend the Association of Former U.S. Secret Service Agents. And I went there because they were going to see Reagan's ranch. But the first night they have a cocktail party, and I saw Clint Hill there, Jackie Kennedy's agent. And I had met him in the 72 Democratic Convention in Miami, briefly. I went up to Clint and I said, "Hi, Clint. My name's Sue Ann Baker, and I was one of," and he cut me off. And he said, "I know who you are. You're one of the first five, along with Laurie Anderson and Phyllis Shantz," and he names all of us. From that long ago, I was astounded. So I had 4 short years in the Secret Service. And I always had a mantra. When things got really tough, I just kept saying, "I can do this. I can do this." And then when my husband died, that was also tough. I had to learn how to dream again, how to set goals, how to become an individual instead of half of a couple. And unfortunately, I'm sure there's some of you out there that have gone through that. Writing my book, my memoir, was one of the toughest things I've ever done. And there were a lot of nights I sat at my computer going, "Okay, I can do this. I can do this." But if you have things that you want to accomplish, then you need to learn how to dream and set goals. And I want you to know that oak trees take 40 to 70 years to produce acorns. And I know that's true. I read it on the internet. But I'm telling you that there's still time. It's my point. So I would hope that you would share your memories of history, of what it was like to be a woman in the 50s and 60s and 70s with your children and grandchildren, because otherwise they'll never have a clue of what it was like. And while you're sharing your stories, you might want to consider sharing your story of your faith journey. Because it's true that we are what He has made us. So I will end with my mantras. Face your fears. Everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. Be in the moment. Breathe. And know that you can all do it. Thank you.